Thanks, Brian, for joining us. We have a very unique episode of Show Me the Data podcast where we're going to dig into the stats that we're seeing across virtual events over the last 3 months with COVID hitting. There's been a big shift in the market from in-person events to virtual. And so we're fortunate to have Bryant here, who's from Banzai and is in a unique position to kind of share the data that they're seeing from across the industry. Brian, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Alex.
Cool. So maybe just to help our listeners that aren't familiar with Banzai, can you share a little bit about what it is that you guys do?
Yeah, so Banzai provides an event marketing automation platform so that demand gen and field marketers can drive targeted audiences to their events across multiple channels, track ROI, and show the values opportunities that they are creating for the organization.
That's awesome. And I think we were talking about this earlier, but prior to maybe this year, you had sunsetted a virtual event product and started to focus solely on in-person. And so it just happened that you're able to spin that up relatively quickly with everything that happened.
Yeah, that's correct. So if you go back like a year or so ago, we had both an in-person and virtual product that we were selling with success. And we decided that as a company, though, really the direction we wanted to go was just more geared towards in-person events. We kind of made that strategic decision, which I think was the right decision at the time. And then, like many decisions, things changed. So back in, I think it was around March, when we saw that really, in-person events weren't going to be around for a while, we decided to shift to a purely virtual event strategy. And we're able to really kind of recommission an existing product we had, get it up to snuff, and then start selling it. And we've customers have really been loving the updated platform.
That's awesome. So for the podcast today and for the episode, what we want to do is kind of take us through what we're seeing from an event marketing perspective in the industry based on your expertise. So to start us off, can you walk us through where things were at with event marketing prior to COVID hitting?
Yeah, so in February of 2020, we had actually started doing a benchmark study. And you kind of see a lot of companies do this, where they just survey a bunch of people within the industry to understand kind of what their strategy is for the upcoming year. And we were creating that in the hopes of creating a benchmark report that we would share at some point later in 2020. Well, we ran that survey right around mid-February. And as we're creating this report, we just see everything change. But we got a lot of really interesting insights as to what the state of event marketing was prior to COVID. And we've seen things like at least over half of those that responded had over $100,000 dedicated to events in 2020. A third of respondents were not planning any webinars, and at least 97% of respondents planned some sort of in-person events. So a lot of the stats that you'd probably, if you were to guess, you would think that would be the direction that people would be going. But it was really great to have some solid data about what people were planning for their 2020 event strategy prior to COVID hitting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the one that really stood out to me there was a third of respondents were not planning to run any webinars. So those marketing departments, when COVID hit, I can only imagine the panic in trying to adjust.
Oh yeah.
Cool. So now that I guess we're fortunate that we have some glass that we can look back through, having looked back at February and looking forward at what people were planning to do, what actually started to happen as marketers were responding to COVID?
Yeah, so as you would assume, a lot of companies started running more webinars. And what's interesting is that being at Banzai, we're in a position where we can kind of anonymize some of our customer data and start to see what was that increase in switch to webinars. So in March, when things first started to happen, we saw an 8% increase in the average number of webinars per account year over year. So March 2020 to March 2019. But then in April, we saw a significant increase of 132%. And then in May, saw a 208% increase year over year for the month of May. So, kind of what we would assume that people would go towards webinars and virtual events. But to the extent, I don't think anyone really knew, and it's been really eye-opening to have this data to see how much event marketers have had to change their strategy over these past few months.
Yeah, and it's interesting that, and a lot of people have, and just in conversations that we've had as well, shifted more virtual, but walk us through what the actual results are in terms of people that are attending these webinars. Are we seeing an increase in this, in similarly with more events, there's more attendees, or is it actually having a reverse effect?
Yeah, so in March, we saw a 10% increase in average number of event registrations year over year. And then in April saw a 37% increase in event registrations per webinar year over year. So I think, one thing that many people didn't necessarily realize is that with the switch to virtual, you inherently are going to have also a larger audience that can attend. And I think we're starting to see some of that with the data in terms of registrations, that more people are able to attend their events, which does help, eventually increase pipeline as well. The interesting thing is that we saw May come back a little bit more to normal levels. So there might be some signs that people are getting a little bit of that Zoom fatigue that we're hearing about, that marketers definitely want to stay on top of and try and make sure that we're keeping our virtual events engaging over the next couple months.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I can, and just looking back at my own inbox, the amount of invites that I've had has, at the beginning, was definitely very high, and I was very inclined to attend. Whereas now it is that Zoom fatigue that you mentioned. So I think striking that balance as you think about it, and the data speaks to it exactly in what we're seeing.
Yeah.
Cool. So as we kind of look forward, and I guess there's quite a bit of uncertainty around when in-person events will be able to happen again. What do you think the path moving forward looks like for us in the event space?
Yeah, so we're still gathering a lot of data around this, but we conducted another survey during a webinar that we hosted a month ago. And we asked the same question to the audience that was attending that. And what we found is that at least 23% were planning to start in-person events again in the fall of 2020. 60% were planning to restart in-person events in the spring of 2021. And another remaining 15% were planning to restart in fall of 2021. So it kind of gives you an interesting insight there that I don't think anyone really has it nailed down as to when they're going to restart them, but the group consensus is leaning a little bit more towards the spring of 2021, which tells us that virtual events are going to be here for a while, and we'll definitely have to make sure they're a part of any event marketing strategy for the next few months.
Absolutely. It'll be very interesting to see if there's any correlation between people that are going back and thinking of in person and mirroring that with virtual events as well to make them more accessible.
Yeah, 100% agree.
Yeah.
Just having talked to some event marketers, I think we might actually start seeing a little bit more of hybrid events where, there might be some aspect of it that's in person, but there'll also be a virtual alternative, just because everyone's going to have varying levels of comfort with returning to in-person events. And I think marketers are going to have to think about how they can accommodate that going forward.
Yeah, I think I saw 2 days ago, really cool group that was done through VR. So it'll be interesting to see how technology comes in, and from when you start to say about a hybrid and how you can get people in a room where they may not actually be. I think that's a big space for disruption that we might start to see when you think about virtual and pairing in person.
Yeah, that's really interesting. We'll definitely keep an eye on that.
Cool. Well, thanks, Bryant, for coming on and sharing all this data with us. If people want to connect with you, what's the best way to continue a conversation?
Yeah, bryant.lau@getbanzai.com is the easy way to reach me, but also on Twitter at BryantAJLau if they want to reach me there.
Awesome. Thanks, Bryant. I hope you enjoyed another unfluffy episode of the Show Me the Data podcast. If you want to become part of our community with other demand gen leaders and get exclusive access to Q&As with the guests we have on the show, click the link in the description of the podcast.